You say dozens of Native American words every single day without realizing it. Words like barbecue, hurricane, chocolate, and hammock all come from indigenous languages, and when you find out how many common English words are actually Native American, you'll never speak the same way again. Ready to discover that your everyday vocabulary is full of indigenous words that survived colonization? Barbecue comes from the Taino word barbacoa, which Spanish colonizers heard in the Caribbean and brought into English. The cooking method and the word are both indigenous American inventions that became global. Hurricane is from the Taino word hurakán, their storm god. When Spanish colonizers encountered Caribbean hurricanes, they adopted the indigenous name because English had no word for storms that powerful. Chocolate comes from the Aztec Nahuatl word zocolotl. The food was invented by indigenous Mesoamericans, and we still use their word for it thousands of years later, proving the cultural impact. Hammock is another Taino word, hammock. Spanish sailors saw indigenous peoples using suspended beds and adopted both the invention and the name, spreading it worldwide. Avocado comes from Nahuatl, ahuacatl, tomato from tomatl, chili from cheli. Basically, if you're describing food, there's a good chance you're using a Native American word because indigenous peoples invented or cultivated most of these foods. Canoe comes from the Arawakan word canoe. Europeans had boats, but indigenous peoples had perfected lightweight watercraft, and colonizers adopted the technology and the name. Moose, skunk, raccoon, and chipmunk are all from Algonquian languages. When English colonizers encountered animals they'd never seen, they used the indigenous names because they had no words for these species. Tobacco is from Taino tobacco, another indigenous plant and word that went global. Native Americans discovered, cultivated, and named it. And despite centuries of colonization, we still use their word. Place names across America are indigenous. Chicago, Algonquian for wild onion garlic place. Manhattan, Lenape, Connecticut, Algonquian for Long River. Massachusetts, Miami, Utah, Idaho. You literally can't describe American geography without using native words. Caucus comes from Algonquian, moccasin from Algonquian moccasin, toboggan from Micmac. Even political and winter sports terms are indigenous because Native Americans invented the concepts and colonizers kept the names. Every time you say these words, you're speaking indigenous languages that survived forced assimilation, boarding schools, and centuries of attempted erasure. The words survived because they named things that didn't exist in English or were so perfectly suited that no English word could replace them. The fact that indigenous languages contributed hundreds of words to English, but most Americans don't realize they're speaking native words, shows how thoroughly indigenous cultural contributions have been erased from consciousness. The words survived, but the knowledge of their origins didn't. This is just a tiny fraction. There are hundreds more Native American words in English, from kayak, Inuit, to pecan, Algonquian, to coyote, Nahuatl, and that doesn't even count all the words in Spanish, Portuguese, and French that came from indigenous languages. Follow for part 2, where I'll reveal more Native American words you use every day without knowing it, including some that will absolutely shock you.